What is up, you guys? Glitchiz here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you a bit of a beginner's, maybe an intermediate level guide for new players, and showing off the ins and outs of how to properly upgrade your weapons and armor. I know when I first started out it was a bit confusing. There's a lot of attributes and things within the weapons and armor that you can upgrade that you may or may not know how it works. So hopefully by the end of this guide you guys will be pros at it and you won't have any problem upgrading this stuff and getting those late game meta builds ready. So let's jump right into it. Right out the gate when you're first starting out, I believe it's even part of the journey and like the main storyline, it's going to ask you to craft a weapons bench, a basic weapons bench, a basic armor bench, and you get those through your cradle and the memetics tab. And under facilities right here, you're going to notice you have a primary supplies workbench, a basic weapons workbench, and a basic armor workbench. Now, for the sake of the demonstration and not going too crazy, I'll only focus on weapons, but know that the weapons and armor upgrading systems are identical. They work exactly the same. So whatever I tell you for weapons, it's going to be the same thing for armor. So let's do some weapons here. So when you first start out, the only thing you're going to be able to create is a basic weapons workbench. So let's create that real quick. Going to be under facilities, basic weapons workbench, and let's just throw one down. Now before we jump into the bench, let's look at a weapon. So if we go to gear, let's hover over any of them, for example, you'll notice in the tooltip that there's a bunch of different stats here. Damage, fire rate, you got some primary attributes, you got a tier level, a calibration number, a bunch of stars. Like, what do they mean? So the top right corner, the tier level, that is your like big jumps in damage, and those are directly correlated to the tier level of the workbench that you have. So as you go into your cradle and you start progressing through the game and start beating the bosses, you're going to unlock different tiers of memetics. And when you first start out, you're only going to have the basic. Once you beat the first boss, the Foul Shadow Hunter, you're going to unlock tier 2, which then unlocks the intermediate workbenches, and then so on and so forth. Once you go back and you defeat the next boss, tier 3, tier 4, so on and so forth, you'll unlock the advanced workbenches. So there's 3 tiers in the beta. There may or may not be more in the final one. And even tier-wise might increase in the final game. Right now in the beta, it only goes from tier 1 to tier 5. It may go higher, may go to 6, 7, who knows. But in the beta, 5 is the highest, and just know that they directly correlate to the level of workbench that you have. So back to the gear, and I'll show that off a little bit more detail here in a second. So top right corner, we have the tier level. Just know that is the big jump in your base damage, and that is based off the level of the bench that you're crafting from. The tier 1 workbench, the basic one you build, will allow you to craft tier 1 and tier 2. Once you level up, beat a couple bosses, get more memetics unlocked, and you get the intermediate workbench, both for the weapons and the armor. That will unlock tier 3 and tier 4. And then last but not least, once you get the final tier 3 one, that will unlock tier 5. So once you get your highest level one, the workbench is what allows you to craft that higher tier. Next up, under the name, you'll see a calibration number. Now, calibrations are like the little mini boosts in attributes, both for damage and your primary attributes. When I say primary attributes, I mean like the crit rate, the crit damage, the weak spot damage. When you upgrade those at the bench, let's go to calibrate here, you'll notice that both the damage and the attributes go up for calibration. It's not going to be huge jumps, but it does allow you to get a little bit more of a boost within the same tier. So you're not limited to just a tier 1, a tier 2. You can get a tier 2 and then calibrate it to a little bit higher. So that's nice. Once you get to like the more later end strongholds in the zone that you're particularly in, you can get a little bit of an extra boost. And now obviously all of these calibrations, all of these tier things are going to require materials. This will be geared around the zone that you're in, so most likely if you're following the proper progression, you will have these materials in storage. Once you get to higher calibrations on rarer like purple and gold weapons, it will start using stardust sources. So watch out for that. You can burn through these. Like, it costs 170 just for this from 4 to 5 on this purple weapon. That is a ton. So you kind of want to pick and choose which weapons you're using early on and kind of like strategically plan it out a little bit so you don't burn through these super quick. But yeah, I believe the first calibration doesn't require Stardust, but from then on, you're going to be using a little bit each time, more and more and more and more and more. So yeah, the calibrations are just a little bit of a boost in between each tier. So keep that in mind, and you do that from the bench itself as well. Moving on, last but not least, is we have the little star symbols there. Now this was the most confusing for me because for whatever reason in the beginning I thought that was the calibration, that star was going up, but it's not. The stars are what's called enhancements, and the enhancements are directly tied to the number of blueprints that you have for that particular weapon. And the way you do that is you go to blueprints, you see the list of all your weapons, and for example, I'll go to one that I haven't upgraded yet. Let's do the Dusty. If you right click, that brings up all the base stats for that weapon. And then on the second tab, you see an enhancement tab. Here is where you upgrade those stars. And now, unlike the calibrations and the tier upgrades where you use materials, the enhancements are going to be very minimal, like min-max, mid to late game bonuses that you get only for the primary attributes. And the only thing you can use to upgrade it are other blueprints. So this is one thing. I know a lot of you are annoyed with the wish machine and things like that, where you're praying for that purple or gold blueprint, but you get a ton of these crappy blue and blue ones that you don't really want. That kind of happened with me with the icebreaker. I've got this thing like practically maxed out, but I just got a ton of extra icebreaker blueprints that I'm never going to use. So what you can do is any extra blueprints that you're not using, it could be from a different weapon, or you get a little bit extra if you use blueprints from the same weapon. You just click that and you use the blueprints to fill up this experience bar meter that is required to increase the tier level to the next tier. So every tier that you go up, the required XP is going to be a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And you can use, if you don't want to use all of your blueprints, you can use a couple of this one, click another one, use a couple of that one. And the goal is to basically combine a bunch of extra blueprints you have to fulfill that XP requirement to upgrade it. So once you get it to max, I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to be using this weapon really, but you would then click and hold to enhance, and that would increase the star level of that weapon, and it would boost the base primary attributes of that weapon as well. Quick example of one that I do have that I use is something like the Pioneer. It's a blue weapon, but it's a really good rifle. Shrapnel is like overpowered right now, so I use it like crazy still, and I wanted to enhance this one a lot. I also had a ton of extra Pioneer blueprints. So as you can see, I'm already maxed out in the stars here. So that means I just had a ton of extra blueprints, put them all in, and fulfilled rather that experience bar 4 times to get it to the max quality. And again, that's only going to be for the primary attributes. So that is basically, in short, what those 3 different things are. Tiers is the big jumps in damage. That's related to the quality of the workbench that you're crafting it from. Calibration is the small boosts in damage and attributes that you can do within each tier. And then last but not least, the stars are the enhancement level, which is the final little min-maxing you can do. And that uses the extra blueprints that you have. Now, quick little tips that you can look into is that when you know you're about to craft a higher tier weapon, unfortunately, you do have to start from scratch and rebuild that weapon all over again and create a brand new one at the higher tier. But thankfully, what you can do is go over to your disassembly bench, which is another entry-level build device that you're going to be making early on. And there's multiple tabs here. And you'll notice that there's one for armor and one for weapons as well. So say I had a tier 6, it's not in the beta, but hypothetically speaking, say I wanted to craft a tier 6 Pioneer. I would craft my tier 6 Pioneer. At this point, I no longer need my tier 5. So if I'm just shy of the materials that I need to craft the tier 6, you can actually break down the previous tier 1, and not only will you get a ton of the materials that were used to craft it, but you'll get a bunch of that Stardust back, which is very handy and hard to come by once you start upgrading things. You saw that that one Evo was like 117, 100, maybe even 170 of these Stardust things just for one upgrade. So breaking down your old one will give you a lot of those materials back to help you get the required materials to help make that higher tier one. So keep that in mind. And then last but not least, I'll probably just show it off real quick. The tiers, how I said it was tied to the workbenches. Basic workbenches when you first start out are only going to allow tier 1 and tier 2. Once you beat a couple bosses, you rank up, and you get access to the next level. You're going to craft an intermediate workbench. This then unlocks the tier 3 and tier 4 big upgrades for your weapons. And for the crafting materials, this is obviously going to tie in to the progressively harder to get materials for the higher level zones. And it usually works out that, like, by the time you beat the boss and you're ready to move to the next zone, you're going to be starting to collect these materials anyway. But if you don't have the materials, it usually just means that it's in the next zone over that you have to go to, and you'll start, all your junk will all of a sudden start dropping when you break them down, the parts that you need. So the intermediate, again, is tier 3 and tier 4. And then last but not least, once you get to the end game, like we are, you can start crafting the tier 3 advanced weapons and armor workbenches. And yeah, that is pretty much it. Just work your way through the game, get the mimetics unlocked to get the next tier up workbenches. Primary objective is to craft the highest tier you can craft possible. Once you craft that highest tier, then you start working on calibration to get that mid-level bump. And then by late game, once you start going through... Oh, and the other thing is, I believe that the enhancements, and this is another nice little tip, or not a tip, but a perk rather, is that the enhancements do carry over. So if you've got even a tier 1 Pioneer, for example, but you enhance it to like the 4 stars, the max 4 stars, that stays permanent no matter what tier you craft. So the next time you go to craft a tier 4 or a tier 5 Pioneer, it will automatically build as a tier 4 5-star enhancement Pioneer. So the blueprint aspect of it, the enhancement aspect of it, that will carry over to the different tier levels that you make. You don't have to worry about redoing that from scratch. So that's good. That one does carry over. But unfortunately, every time you make a higher tier, you will have to recalibrate it starting from level 1 again and doing your brand new weapon for each tier as well. But yeah, that is pretty much it, you guys. If you found this video informative, helped you out, be sure to smash that like button, comment down below. I appreciate all of you guys' feedback. Last but not least, if you want to keep up to date on all my future Once Human content, consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a ton of new guides coming out by the end of this beta, and the support that I've been getting has been awesome. I appreciate all of you guys' support. It means a lot. But yeah, until the next one, you guys, I hope you all have a great day, and see you all later.